Hello everyone, welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax and dive into tonight's case. Today I told you about 10 sickening true crime stories of serial killers that tortured, hacked, and butchered their victims. First is Alexander Pierce, cannibal ex-convict. Overview. Alexander Pierce was an Irish prisoner who broke out with a number of his fellow inmates. For 9 weeks, they journeyed through the wilderness of Tasmania, and during this time, Pierce ate all his companions. Early life and petty crimes. Alexander Pierce was born in 1790 in County Fermanagh, Ireland. He arrived in Tasmania, Australia in 1821. There, he became a farmer and a petty thief who was in and out of prison. He was usually punished with a beating or whipping, and forced to work in chains for his petty crimes. He was caught stealing the ducks and turkeys of his neighbors and a large wheelbarrow. Pierce was also heavily punished for being extremely drunk and inappropriate on several occasions. However, Pierce would always find a way to escape even if his sentences were only short. The number of times he escaped prison can be equal to the number of times he was charged with different crimes. The authorities, apparently sick of his frequent prison breaks, sent Pierce to Macquarie Harbour, a prison on Sarah Island with thick and unexplored jungle surrounding it. The escape. The Macquarie Harbour, as described by guards and the prisoners themselves, was a totally isolated place with unpredictable weather. The prison was surrounded by forests of huge trees, and the prisoners' main duties were to cut and transport good quality timber. The forests were composed of large myrtle, beeches and tough pines which are used for making boats. The prisoners, apparently tired of the hard and repetitive work, 7 of them, including Alexander Pierce, Thomas Bodenham, Edward Brown, Alexander Dalton, Robert Greenhill, John Mather, and Matthew Travers, devised a plan to escape. On September 20, 1822, they succeeded in fleeing the prison. The group originally planned to travel by sea, but it didn't work very well, so they impulsively took the track into the mountains and forests. The next inhabited place was 225 kilometers away, and the escapees who braved the vast area were extremely under-equipped. Greenhill chose himself as the spearhead of the team since he possessed an axe that he had discreetly obtained while they were in prison. Cannibalism. Through the hard terrain and forests, the men were already famished. After 8 days of continuous traveling, they realized that if they didn't eat soon, they would all perish, and they agreed that their best bet was to eat each other. Due to an unknown reason, the group first killed Alexander Dalton by using their one and only axe. This deed made Brown and Kennerly fear for their lives, so they fled and went back to the prison. Though the two made it back, they shortly died because of overfatigue. For 42 days, the 5 remaining men coursed the wilderness of Tasmania, led by Greenhill, who had a good knowledge of navigation. Since they needed to eat to be able to go on, the next weaker man got killed. Human flesh, unlike normal food, never satisfies hunger since it is only rich in protein and not carbohydrates, the nutrient that provides energy. The team's cannibalism continued, and the killing did not cease until only 3 men were left: Greenhill, Pierce and Travers. The men first cooked the severed body parts, intestines, and other internal organs of their companions. However, as time went by, they found the food preparation tedious, so they decided to eat them raw. At this point, Pierce thought that he was next, since the 2 other men, Greenhill and Travers, seemed to have formed an alliance. However, Pierce got fortunate when Travers was bitten by a venomous snake. For days, Greenhill and Pierce dragged and carried their dying companion. On the fifth day, Travers finally begged them to kill him, and both men killed him in his sleep with the axe. They brought Travers' flesh with them, to aid them in their remaining days of travel. With only 2 men left, Greenhill and Pierce had a sleeping challenge. Both were sure that the one who slept would be the one who would certainly be killed. After 8 days, Greenhill finally fell asleep, and Pierce did not lose the chance to grab the axe and chop off his companion's head. For several weeks, Pierce continued to travel through the terrain, and he eventually reached an Aborigine settlement. There, he stole food to sustain himself. As he saw sheep, he knew that he had finally reached the inhabited districts. Luck was on his side when he came upon a shepherd whom he knew. He lived in the area for a number of months, where he commenced robbing livestock from farms. He was eventually spotted and was recaptured after 113 days of being free. Upon his return to the prison, he confessed about the cannibalism of his group. He retold every detail of their journey and claimed that he was the sole survivor. Some of the authorities did not believe the story, especially Robert Knopwood, who firmly assumed that the other prisoners with Pierce were still, either in the wild, or went to stay in other district settlements. Pierce was nevertheless returned to Macquarie Harbour. Second escape and trial. He stayed in prison for several months when he and a friend named Thomas Cox decided to escape prison again. According to Pierce himself, it was him who pestered Cox to come with him, which he later regretted. After 10 days, Pierce surrendered near the King River, which is now called the River of Strahan. However, his young companion Thomas Cox was nowhere to be seen. Upon inspection, the police found some body parts of Cox in Pierce's pockets. The odd thing was, he still had an ample amount of food with him. The act of cannibalism was apparently not necessary for survival. During his trial on June 20, 1824, Pierce admitted that Cox drove him to the end of his wits because the latter was a hindrance. In the course of the escape, Pierce noted that Cox slowed him down because of his inability to swim. The witnesses after Pierce surrendered stated that he was indeed remorseful of his actions, and that he surrendered because of guilt. However, when he was asked why he murdered again, he eerily said that human flesh tastes better than anything else, and it was far better than any meat, may it be fish or pork. Pierce was found guilty of murdering Cox and was given a death sentence. On July 19, 1824, Alexander Pierce was hanged in the town jail of Hobart after the last rites were given by a priest. Second killer. Peter Stump, Werewolf of Bedburg. Overview. Peter Stump was a serial killer and a cannibal, dubbed the Werewolf of Bedburg, during the 16th century. His murders were performed in a gruesome and inhuman way. He ravaged the body parts, ripped out the internal organs, chopped off the arms and legs, and in some cases, ate the unborn child inside a woman's body. His favorites were children, infants, women, and even livestock. Early life. Peter Stump was a farmer in the small community of Bedburg, in Cologne, Germany, a city that was still a part of the Holy Roman Empire at that time. There is some confusion as to Stump's real name, with the variations of Stub or Stump, since it is believed to be coined due to the fact that his left hand was severed. Some references state that his real name was Griswold. Stump was a respected figure of the community, apparently because of his incredible wealth and influence. His date of birth was unknown, but it is hypothesized that by 1580s, his wife had already died and he had 2 children. One girl and one boy. Stump and his family lived in a time when there were conflicts between the Catholics and Protestants. The armies of both parties would meet in the heart of Bedburg, and encounters would usually leave casualties. Also, it was during that era when there was a large epidemic caused by the Black Plague. Conflict and death were not uncommon in the region where Stump lived. To his fellow villagers, Stump was a very wealthy and decent man who lived with both his children and was sometimes visited by some of his relatives. However, the truth was, he had an intimate relationship with one of his kin and he constantly abused his daughter. The father-daughter incestuous relationship eventually resulted in the birth of a baby boy. Murders. Despite the frequency of death and devastation in the area, one specific case arose the worry of the already anxious citizens. There were several deaths of livestock, especially cattle, and eventually, deaths of humans. At first, they thought that they were caused by an enormous wolf. The guts were usually ripped out and the other body parts chopped up and even spread around in different places. For 25 years, Stump wore a wolf's skin above his head. Those who have seen a glimpse of him described him as a wolf-like creature with huge eyes, wide mouth, sharp teeth, massive paws and a large and strong body frame. The killings continued for years, and at some point, people would travel through towns in groups or in wagons laden with weapons. Sometimes, they would find severed body parts of the werewolf's victims in fields and forests. Stump's attacks were varied and he seemed not to care if his prey was an animal or a human. His victims were 1. Livestock. Stump seemed to have taken a liking to cattle and cows. The farmers feared for the life of their livestock, because they would often randomly find their cattle dead in the fields. The cattle would lay on the ground, mutilated and viciously ripped open by some large and savage creature. Smaller animals, like lambs and calves, were usually ripped open and apparently devoured raw, since their organs were often missing. The attacks lasted for years and years. At first, they suspected the attacks were from a large pack of wolves, but they never thought that a human, Peter Stump, was capable of the deeds. His attacks on the livestock were believed to have fueled Stump's desire to murder people, too. 2. Men and women. Stump murdered both men and women, but more of the latter. For young women, he first raped and abused them before he took their lives. Stump would then tear them apart. One case involved the killing of 2 men and a woman who were strolling outside the city. Stump was crouched behind the dark bushes which completely hid him. He then pretended to call for help. The young man came to his aid, and when he did, Stump forcefully smashed his head with a large rock. Curious why his friends still hadn't returned, the other man went behind the bushes where he too was killed. The woman, who was shaking with fear, tried to run away but to no avail. She was also killed, but her body was never found, unlike the other 2. Some hypothesize that Stump might have raped then killed the woman. On why her body was never recovered, it is assumed that Stump ate her completely. 3. Pregnant women. In the course of Stump's slaughters, he murdered 2 pregnant women. After killing the women, Stump slashed their stomachs open and ripped the fetuses out of their mother's body with his bare hands. He would then proceed to eat the still beating heart of the infant. According to Stump himself, he liked the taste of the hot and raw hearts of the infants, and he described them as exquisite snacks. 4. Children. When children disappeared from the farms and homes, their family would often assume that there was no chance that they would see their offspring alive. Dead children with excessively mutilated body parts were not an uncommon sight. Some of the children were never even found. The children were strangled to death, beaten, and their throats were ripped open by using bare hands, or claws, according to the villagers. Some of their bodies had the stomach ripped open and their intestines and internal organs were partially eaten. In one case, one child was fortunate enough to survive the attack of the werewolf. According to her, she was just playing with her friends in the meadows among some cows and their calves when a large creature or man came after them. Stump eventually got hold of her and he tried to gash the child's throat with his hands. Luckily, the child was wearing a high collar and she had the chance to cry for help. The cows heard the girl's cries and it startled them. The cattle then went after Stump. Another notable case of Stump's slaughter was that of his own family. The result of the incestuous relationship of Stump and his daughter Belle was a baby boy. Upon interrogation, Stump admitted that he killed his own son. He detailed that he led his young son deep into the forest, beat him to death and ate his brains raw. Capture. The villagers were certain that a ravaging animal, most probably a wolf, was on the loose. It caused numerous livestock deaths and deaths of women, children, and infants. Hunters set out to capture the animal, so they coursed the forests with dogs in pursuit of the culprit. According to one hunter, they apparently chased and cornered a large wolf, but it changed into Peter Stump in front of their eyes. This side of the story is disputed and the supposed transformation was just Peter Stump taking off his wolf hide. The hunters could not believe their eyes because Stump was a respectable man in the community. Nevertheless, he was brought to trial. During the trial, Stump told the authorities that at the age 12, he made a pact with the devil. Their deal was that he would sell his soul in exchange for earthly pleasures. However, Stump described himself as a wicked person who liked destruction, blood, and cruelty. So, the devil gave him a belt that enabled him to transform into a werewolf, whose main goal was to kill and eat humans. He confessed to killing the farmers' livestock, mutilating the young and unborn children and sexually abusing women, then murdering them. He also admitted that he was in a relationship with his daughter, his relative, and a female demon. The witnesses stated that Stump had the habit of walking through the town's streets and greeting the families and friends of his victims, who had no idea that the wealthy farmer had caused their beloved's death. In the end, Peter Stump admitted to having killed 14 children, 2 pregnant women and 2 fetuses, during the 25 years before he was caught. Of the 14 children, 1 was his own child. The number of murders in that time was far beyond the number that Stump confessed, and the authorities believed that those were also his doing. Execution. On October 28, 1589, Stump was found guilty of all the murders that he confessed to. His daughter and his mistress were also found guilty for being accomplices to the crimes. The 3 of them were sentenced to death, 3 days after, on All Hallows Eve of 1589. On October 31, 1589, the execution of Stump was noted as one of the most brutal executions in history. His body was laid and strapped on a wheel in a spread-eagled position. Metal pincers were heated until they were red hot and flesh from 10 different parts of his body were slowly pulled off his bones. His arms and legs were hit with the blunt end of an axe to break them completely and prevent him from crawling out of his grave. All of this was done while he was still alive. To finally kill him, he was beheaded and his body was burned in a big bonfire in the town square. His daughter and his mistress were also publicly executed and burned on stakes beside Stump's body. The magistrate ordered a warning to potential worshippers of the devil to be erected on the site of Stump's execution. The will used to kill stump was set on a high pole, 16 strips of wood were hung to represent all his victims, the body of a wolf was placed on the very top. And above it, Stump's severed head was put in place of the animal's head. Analysis. Hundreds of years after Peter Stump's killing spree, psychologists hypothesize that he was actually suffering from clinical lycanthropy, a kind of schizophrenic condition wherein a person experiences random bouts of neurosis, delusions, slurred and incoherent speech and inappropriate and disordered behavior. Peter Stump's behavior can be explained as lycanthropic attacks wherein he lost his reason and eventually lost his mind. People who experience lycanthropy are people whose fears exceeded their mechanisms of coping, which in turn makes them project their fears onto other people. Third story. Yoo Young-chul, killer of women and the wealthy. Overview. Yoo Young-chul is a South Korean serial killer and cannibal. He has confessed to killing more than 20 people in Seoul. His killing spree was basically fueled by his intense hatred for women and well-off citizens. Early life. Yoo Young-chul was born in a small village in the Jeolla province in April 18, 1970. He was the son of a simple housewife and a war veteran, who, though at some time amassed quite a good fortune, lost everything to gambling. Both his parents were minimum wage earners by the time Yoo was born. Yoo and his parents lived together with his grandmother, who later revealed to the child that his birth was not planned and that his mother once considered aborting him. Yoo was still young when his parents separated and he and his grandmother moved to his father's house in a nearby province. The area was highly impoverished to the point that their only access to water was a single public well, which catered to hundreds of families. His family was very underprivileged, a reason why he was always bullied and made fun of in class. No matter how hard life was, and despite him being colorblind, Yoo still tried his best at school. He was an artist at a young age. He played instruments such as the guitar and the piano. He painted, sang and read poetry. His interest in the arts in elementary school made him choose an art high school. However, he did not gain admission to the school because Yoo's family could not afford the tuition fees. It was also during this time that his father died and he came back into the care of his mother, who enrolled him in a technical school. While he was at school, Yoo committed a number of petty crimes for which he was in and out of prison. Later in his life, Yoo was diagnosed with epilepsy, and his younger brother, who was a manic depressive, committed suicide at the age of 32. Crimes. Yoo committed a number of petty crimes before starting his killing spree. His criminal history started when he was a sophomore high school student. Because of his inability to buy one, he stole his neighbor's guitar and cassette player in 1988. 3 years later, he was again convicted for theft and he was sentenced to 10 months in jail. The number of crimes Yoo committed increased rapidly during the years, but it didn't stop him from starting a family. In the early 1990s, he met Wang, a masseuse. He fell in love with her and married her on June 23, 1993, but he was imprisoned soon after. When he got out again, the couple had a son. In the succeeding years, Yoo continued offending, including theft, selling illegal pornography and fraud. In 2000, however, his crimes became graver when he sexually abused and raped a young girl. Because of this, he was sentenced to 3 years and 6 months imprisonment. His wife, fed up with her husband and discovering his latest gruesome crime, divorced him later that year. In total, Yoo has been convicted 14 times and served 11 years in prison, cumulatively. Murders. Yoo was released from prison in 2002 and he sustained himself by extorting Money from prostitutes using a bogus police ID. 1 year after, Yu started his killing spree. His victims initially comprised of wealthy people and eventually he included women involved in prostitution. For wealthy victims, he usually targeted random, well-off residences during midday or afternoon, when the adults were usually working, and only the old or very young were left at home. For women, he would lure them to his apartment. And there, he would rape and kill them. In 4 of the murders, Yu confessed that he ripped his victims open and ate their livers. 1. First murders, old couple. On September 24, 2003, Yu broke into an elegant residential building in a high-end part of Seoul. His victims were an old couple aged 73 and 68. Yu broke into their house. And the 73-year-old professor was the first person he saw. He attacked the old man and hit his head with a 4-kilogram hammer, which resulted in a crushed skull. Yu then saw the old man's 68-year-old wife. He chased her, beat her to death and smashed her head several times. 2. Second murders, triple murder. On October 9, 2003, just days after his first murder, Yu again broke into a large house in Jongno-gu, Seoul. Yu killed 3 people, which included an 85-year-old woman. 3. Third murder, murder of a well-known person. 7 days after he committed a triple murder, on October 16, 2003, Yu entered a house and killed a 69-year-old woman who was described as a well-known and financially stable figure in Seoul. 4. Fourth murders, triple murder. On November 18, 2003, he broke into a mansion in Jongno-gu, Seoul. It was the house of a prominent and very wealthy family. The 87-year-old house owner was killed once again with a hammer. Her housemaid, aged 53, and her newborn granddaughter, were also murdered. Using the hammer, Yu then tried to open the house's safe, but it only led to a minor injury. He then burned down the house to remove any evidence of his crime. A month after his latest murder, Yu met another girl, a prostitute, whom he fell in love with. When he proposed marriage, the girl quickly turned it down after discovering all of Yu's crimes. She told Yu not to come and see her again. Enraged, Yu pledged to take out his frustration on other prostitutes. He vowed to murder as many as he could. 5. Fifth murder. Fueled by his new anger against women, Yu had shifted his killings to the sex workers in the capital. His first murder of a prostitute was on March 16, 2004, when he saw a target in the Mapo district. He pretended to avail himself of the girl's services and then strangled her to death. Yu then chopped up her body and discreetly buried her remains near the University of Sogang. 6. Sixth murder. Around April or May of the next year, Yu did not murder in the sex houses anymore. Instead, he lured another victim, a prostitute of around 20 years old, to his apartment. He knocked her out using his heavy hammer and mutilated her body in his bathroom. He also severed his victim's head. Yu took the prostitute's remains near a temple in Sidamangu and buried her there. 7. Succeeding murders. For his next murders, from May to July 2004, Yu killed an additional 9 prostitutes from various red light districts in Seoul. He employed the same procedure. He enticed the victim to his apartment. And once there, he would sexually abuse them, smash their heads with his hammer, behead, mutilate, and then put the victim's severed body parts in separate plastic bags. To hide the bodies, Yu buried the plastic bags containing different body parts near the gorge at the back of the Bangwon Temple and Yonsei University. Arrest and confession. By July 2004, the number of missing prostitutes rose and the sex houses became suspicious. At the end of July, you entered an inn and requested an attendant for her service. He mercilessly beat the woman and was reported to the police. For a number of hours, he was chased down and he was eventually captured near Yeongdongpo. On July 15, 2004, when he was searched, a fake police ID was found in his possession. As he was taken into the custody of the police, Yu Young-chul confessed to 21 murders, his victims being wealthy, old people and sex workers. Trial. During Yu's trial, his statement included 21 murders initially, but he changed his statement at the next hearing. He told the authorities that he lost count of the number of people that he might have killed, since according to him, there were too many. In fact, Yu stated that if he hadn't been caught he would not have stopped killing people, even if he reached 100. According to him, the media was underestimating his ability, saying that he had killed too many people, but from his viewpoint, he was just starting out. He admitted having committed acts of cannibalism where, in 4 cases, he ate his victims' livers. Yu told the court that he enjoyed eating their internal organs raw since it had a positive effect on him and that it cleared his mind. The court was contemplating if they should enforce the death penalty in Yu's case. Surprisingly, Yu agreed to the initiation of the capital punishment. He said that he did not deserve to live and it would be unfair for humanity if people like him existed. Yu led the police to where he buried the bodies of the girls that he had murdered. They unearthed numerous plastic bags containing body parts of approximately 11 women. Grudge for the wealthy. Throughout Yu's trial, his grudge for well-off citizens was apparent. His targets were usually wealthy and renowned people in society, and he seldom stole from them. You would just break into their houses, usually mansions and high-end residential buildings, during midday, and kill those living there. According to the psychiatrists who analyzed Yu's case, it was the criminals' way of getting even with society and the government, whom he blamed for the hardships and the poverty that his family went through. Yu killed as he had a grudge against the social system that praised the rich and made them even richer, but undermined the poor, who, despite their perseverance, couldn't improve because of the system that governed their nation. Because of the lack of attention regarding this problem, Yu decided to take the matter into his own hands. Grudge against women. Another driving force behind Yu's murders was his hatred for women. At a young age, Yu experienced rejection from his mother herself, which sparked his dislike for women. The second instance that intensified his hatred was the divorce from his wife in 2002, who left him while he was still in prison. Yu confessed that he planned to kill her but didn't because he was thinking of their son. Yu was believed to be mentally unstable during that time. The third, and last instance that drove him over the edge was when he found another girlfriend, a prostitute. He proposed to her but he was, again, rejected. After she discovered his crimes. After that incident, Yu shifted his focus on murdering and butchering prostitutes. Sentence. Though Yu expressed that he had no intention of stopping his murders, he said that he was deeply sorry for his crimes and that his victims did not deserve to die. Throughout the trial, he seemed to be emotionally unstable. One moment he seemed smug and showed no remorse, in another, he would bow his head and appear ashamed. Yu was sentenced to death for 21 murders. The date of his execution, however, is not yet set since South Korea has never given the death penalty since 1998. Fourth crime. Philip Onyanchot, the Vampire of Kenya. Overview. When Philip Onyancha, a Kenyan national, was in high school, he joined a cult whose aim was to murder a certain number of people. Onyancha was tasked with killing 100, but he only managed to kill 19 victims, mostly children and women. He claimed that the blame should not be on him, but on the evil spirits that gave him the intense urge to kill. Onyancha, however, admitted having enjoyed drinking his victims' blood. Early life. Philip Onyancha was born in 1978 in Kenya and was the son of a farmer, Samuel Onyancha, and a businesswoman, Esther Onyancha. Onyancha went to school at the Kenyatta High School, where he was initially highly commended. According to his teachers, Onyancha used to be an extremely intelligent boy at school. During his first year in high school, he topped his exams and was deemed an above-average student, always getting straight A's. His professors recalled that Onyancha talked in an eloquent and authoritative manner that made his classmates look up to him. He led the class in terms of academic achievements and at the same time, extracurricular ones. Onyancha often represented his school in sports-related activities, such as ball games and athletics. His first year in high school turned out very promising, but when he reached the next level, there was something off about Onyancha's behavior. His mentors noted the decrease in the boy's competency, and they were surprised that he emerged with a C- in a very important examination. They recalled that everything went downhill after Onyancha was suspended for weeks because of a minor bullying incident. He was abruptly readmitted because of the lack of evidence, but when he came back to school, he wasn't the same bright boy anymore. Cult and kidnap gang. In reality, however, Onyancha confessed that his teacher encouraged him to join a cult in 1996. The cult, according to him, would help him graduate faster and would make him one of the wealthiest men in Kenya. The system of the cult, conversely, was for a member to kill 100 people so he/she could advance to the next level and meet the leader. His involvement with the dark organization was never known until he confessed to the police. Onyancha described the cult as an organization governed by evil spirits that gave them a special power to seduce, charm, or hypnotize people. His modus operandi was to always greet his victim first. The greeting serves as the start of the ritual, and the victim follows him wherever he wants. In a later admission, Onyancha confessed that in the act of killing, he was under the influence of the evil spirits. However, he did not know or see any other member of the said organization. Apart from being a part of a cult, Onyancha also claimed to be a member of a gang who kidnapped people and demanded a ransom from their families. In some cases, their group would kill the victim but still demand a payout. His secret life as a kidnapper and a cult member went unnoticed, since he was employed as a security guard who moved from station to station. His previous employer even commented that Onyancha did not display any suspicious behavior during his service for the company. However, the truth was Onyancha killed every time he was designated to a new service station. Murders. Overall, Onyancha admitted to killing 19 people in Thika, Karen, and nearby towns. His victims were usually women, the weaker sex, according to him, and children, both powerless under his supernatural abilities. Onyancha lured his victims to a secluded place, murdered them, mutilated them, and sometimes bit their necks and sucked their blood dry. 1. Random women. 1. Catherine Chelengat. Catherine Chelengat was a worker in a water company in the suburb of Karen, Kenya. She was last seen near her relative's house early in November 2008. According to her relatives, she went out around 9 p.m. and that was the last they saw of her. For months, her family went looking for her, but the police had no leads on her whereabouts. It was 3 months later that a man called her family demanding 30,000 Kenyan shillings in exchange for Chelangat's safety. Her family begged the kidnapper for more time since they did not have that larger sum of money at that time. When they paid half of the ransom money, they were never contacted by the kidnappers again. 2 years after Chelangat went missing, Onyencha led the police to the crime scene where he had performed the gruesome murder. According to him, in November 2008, he lured a woman unknown to him to one of the department stores in Karen. Onyencha, then a security guard in the water company where Chelangat was an employee, greeted the woman and told her to follow him. They went inside the department store and he led her to the stairs up to the roof. He said that the woman did not appear suspicious and blindly followed him. In the small ceiling compartment, Onyencha strangled Chelangat to death with his bare hands. He then bit her neck and sucked her blood. As Onyencha led the police to where he stashed the body, the police found a woman's body in an advanced stage of decomposition. The employees in the establishment were astonished that they never noticed a decaying body just above their heads. Onyencha told the police that he was definitely certain that the body would not be found. 2. Unknown woman found on Riverside Drive. Also in 2008, Onyencha was stationed as a security guard in the compound of a European diplomat in Riverside Drive, Nairobi. He murdered another woman in the premises of the compound. According to him, he just saw the woman walking along the road, shook her hand and led her in. There, he murdered the victim and sucked her blood using his own mouth. He then disposed of the body in the septic tank of the compound. When he told the police to check the tank, they found the skeleton of the woman along with her purse and other personal belongings. 3. Unknown woman found near Gakura Road. Onyencha murdered another woman in a lodging in Gakura Road, Nyeri, Kenya. He claimed that he lured a random woman he met on the street into the lodging house around midnight. He even negotiated with the employees of the place to mark down the price of the room. According to him, he did not sexually abuse the woman. All he did was strangle her to death and drink her blood. Onyencha left the corpse in the room and fled before daybreak. 2. Prostitutes. 1. 4 prostitutes murdered in different lodgings. Onyencha also targeted sex workers and his modus operandi was to pretend that he was a client seeking their services. In different lodgings in Thika, he murdered 4 prostitutes all on different occasions. Onyencha strangled them to death. 2. Helen Nyambura. Nyambura was a prostitute that Onyencha invited to a lodging named Ruambogo Lodging. Onyencha invited the woman, rented a room in the said lodging house and killed her with his bare hands. The morning after, Nyambura's body was found in the room that they had occupied and her death was all over newspapers and TV reports. However, Onyencha claimed that he was not even anxious because the evil spirits from his cult assured him that he would not be caught. 3. Jacqueline Wambui. After he murdered Nyambura, he then murdered Jacqueline Wambui, another prostitute in the Thika area. Her body was found in the suitable hotel but the police had no leads on the suspect at that time. 3. Children. 1. Young Nathan Baraza and an unknown female teenager. While working as a security guard on a local flower farm, Onyencha killed a 9-year-old boy, Nathan Baraza, and a female teenager whose identity is not known. Upon a search of the area, the police found the boys' and the girls' remains, along with their belongings. Baraza's sandals were recovered in the area. and they were positively identified by his mother. According to the boy's family, he was last seen watching a ball game near the flower farm. Months after his disappearance, a note was found in front of the farm, demanding almost 100,000 Kenyan shillings in exchange for the boy's life. In the case of the unknown remains of the teenager, the police suspect that an innocent suspect was charged for her disappearance. Arrest and confession. In 2010, Onyencha was arrested when the police tracked the number that he used to contact the family of another victim for ransom money. Upon his arrest, Onyencha confessed not only to the kidnapping crimes but also to the murder of 19 people. The man said that he was thankful that he was caught by the police, as it was his way of getting out of the curse of his cult, and stopping killing. These are the main things that he told the authorities. He was recruited by his teacher to a blood-sucking cult back in 1996. His aim was to kill 100 people in the span of 5 years to improve his position in the cult, but so far, he had only murdered 19. Onyencha stated that he did not meet any of the cult's members. The evil spirits governing the cult gave him the urge to kill and suck his victims' blood. These spirits would tell him when and where to kill, and that the children and women victims were sacrificed to the evil ones. He admitted strangling them to death and drinking their blood thereafter. Onyencha, although under the instructions of the evil spirits, developed a passion for killing and sucking his victims' blood. He only killed women and children since he viewed them as weak and vulnerable. He was happy to have confessed and that he was incredibly sorry for the murders that he had committed. He stated that he was not himself when he killed, and that he had already lost all power and influence over the evil spirits. Onyencha led the police to all the areas where he dumped the bodies of his 19 victims. Although Onyencha admitted that he never sexually abused any of his victims, the psychologists suspect that he was not telling the truth, since the mindset of a serial killer usually has a sexual component. Onyencha is still in custody and awaiting trial. Fifth killer. Robin Gisht, Chicago Rippers crew leader. Overview. The Chicago Rippers crew, comprising 4 people led by Robin Gisht, were the culprits in a string of female murders in Chicago, Illinois, from 1981 to 1982. Apparently, they picked women at random from their red van and raped and mutilated them. The gang cut their breasts using a piece of wire in a satanic ritual while the leader read satanic Bible verses. Gisht and the 3 other associates would mince the breast and eat it, raw. To finally kill the victim, they would smash the woman's skull until her face was far from recognizable. Early life. Robin Gisht was born on November 30, 1953, and he was a local of Chicago. In some reports, Gisht had a growing obsession with perverted things even when he was still a teenager. In fact, he molested his younger sister so many times that his parents sent him to live with his grandparents. As he grew older, Gisht became overly interested in Satanism and he had different interpretations of Bible verses. He also became a part-time employee of John Wayne Gacy, Jr., Chicago's killer clown, who sexually abused and murdered about 30 men and hid their corpses in tunnels under his house. Gisht was one of the young teenagers that Gacy commissioned to dig the large tunnels, which Gisht didn't know how the latter would put them into use. However, in some of the killer clown's murders, he stated that he was not in Chicago when they happened and he assumed that his accomplices, one of them was Gisht, had performed the murders without his knowledge. Gisht, on the outside, was a charismatic and a rather manipulative person. Women involved with him later claimed that they would have a good relationship at first, until they discovered his strange sexual desires. Gisht would request his lovers to cut their own nipples, stating that he wanted to know how they worked. Probably due to fear, or even love, the women would obey and give him what he wanted. But their pain would not end there. Gisht would explore the open wound and closely examine the severed nipples. This obsession led to the end of the relationships. Despite this, Gisht still managed to find a woman who would marry him. According to one of his associates, later in the couple's married life, Gisht also cut off his own wife's nipples. Chicago Ripper's crew. Gisht, with his charisma and power over people, persuaded three people, Edward Spreitzer and the brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokoralais, to join his cult that honored Satan. Like other satanic cults, the group was controlled by the leader, in this case, Gisht, who claimed to have contact with the devil. Together, they would perform sexual and gruesome acts on the women and their severed body parts. Modus operandi. In the string of murders, the group would go around town with their red van, and pick a woman, usually aged between 20 to 30 years, at random. They would bind her and in some cases force her to take drugs. They would then rape, mutilate, and strangle the victim to death. In every case, however, one of the victim's breasts was cut off. The usual causes of the victim's death was strangulation, bleeding through the large gaping wounds in their breast, and a smashed skull caused by an axe. Rituals. In the later confessions of Thomas Kokoralais, he detailed the rituals that they performed in Gisht's attic, a local motel, or their kidnapping van. Gisht decorated his attic with red and black inverted crosses and an altar with a red cross. The group would perform rituals at night, when Gisht's wife went out to work. The severed breasts were taken to the attic and each of the men would masturbate on the piece of flesh while their leader read satanic Bible verses aloud. When everyone was done, Gisht would cut the breasts into smaller pieces and distribute them as a form of satanic communion, and they all would eat the chopped flesh raw. Then, Gisht would put all the severed breasts into a sort of a trophy box. These deeds, as believed by Spreitzer and the two Kokoralais, were a form of sacrifice to Satan, and they were forced to obey Gisht in fear of what he may do to them, since he had the power and communication with the Dark One. Murders. The murders that the group committed between 1981 to 1982, accounted for 20 deaths of random women from Chicago. Their bodies were often found in graveyards, rivers, and abandoned places, usually undergoing advanced decomposition due to the large wounds from their open chests and breasts, or smashed head. The motive is believed to be of a ritualistic nature rather than theft, because the victims' belongings and money were almost always intact. 1. Linda Sutton. Linda Sutton, a 28-year-old prostitute, went missing around May 1981. She was kidnapped by the crew while she was walking the street. She was taken to a wooded area near the dump site, and handcuffed. The men raped her and removed her breasts. They left her at the dump site. When a maid from a hotel in Villa Park reported smelling something awful in that part of the area, the owner called the police and they found the body of a woman in the field amongst the scattered garbage. The woman's body was in an advanced state of decomposition, but her estimated time of death was only 3 days ago. The experts believe that the condition of the corpse was caused by the open wound of her breasts, giving parasites a large space to enter and rapidly cause her body to decay. 2. Lorraine Borowski. Borowski was an employee in a real estate office in Elmhurst, and she had been on her way to the office on May 15, 1982, when the crew offered her a ride. She refused, and 2 of the men grabbed her and dragged her inside. The gang took her to a motel where they gang raped her. She was bound and a wire was placed around her breast. As the wire tightened, it slowly pierced through the woman's skin until the breast was finally cut off. According to Spritzer, their leader was so aroused at the sight of the severed breast that he performed sexual acts on it. When Gust was done with the breast, he smashed Borowski's head in with an axe which instantly killed her. Borowski's body was found in a cemetery near the motel, 5 months after her death. She was beyond recognition, her remains were almost completely decayed so that the cause of death could not be determined. 3. Shui Mak. Shui Mak, a Chinese national, disappeared on May 29, 1982, when she was on her way to her family's restaurant. The crew offered her a ride and took her to a woodland area. They raped her, sliced off her breasts with a wire and strangled her to death. Her body was recovered in a construction site in Barrington, 4 months after her murder, and the police had no leads as to the perpetrators. 4. Rose Davis. Rose Davis was a businesswoman who was walking to work in the middle of 1982. She was forced into the van by the crew where they killed her with a small axe. Her body was found in a dark alleyway 3 months later, and it is believed that she tried to fight back. Dried blood was observed on her anus from the slashed internal organs, and her face was smashed from repeated strikes of an axe. 5. Carol Pappas. Carol Pappas, the wife of a well-known player of the Chicago Cubs, was abducted while she was shopping in Wheaton, Illinois on September 11, 1982. She was never seen alive again. Her remains were located 5 years later and her death ruled an accident. 6. Raphael Torradue. Hours after the incident of the attempted murder of Beverly Washington, one of the crew's victims, a drug dealer named Raphael Torradue, was killed. The crew allegedly shot the man and his companion. 7. Other murders. There were a number of other murders that Getch's followers confessed to in court. Spritzer described the murder of 2 black prostitutes on different occasions. The first one was picked up by their van, taken to an alleyway, where she was raped and had her left breast removed by a knife. The other one was shot in the head and had her breast cut off. She was then handcuffed, chained, and was thrown into a river with bowling balls to keep her weighed down. Some murders would be done by battering the victim's head in with an axe or a hammer. Gust would force the 3 men to have sex with the wounds while the victim was still alive and screaming in agony. Other victims were tattered using a razor from head to toe. Survivors. There were 2 female survivors who lived to tell the tale of the crew's monstrosity. The first one was Angel York, who was abducted by the gang after Shui Mak, and the second was Beverly Washington, the gang's last female victim, who made it out alive. 1. Angel York. In her testimony, she claimed that a van pulled over and she was forcefully dragged into it. She was bound and raped multiple times. Also, she was instructed by one of the men to cut off her nipples so that she would be spared. When she did, the same man broke into an insane frenzy that made him stab her in the chest and masturbate on her wound. Gust duct taped the wound and instructed the other 3 to throw York out of the van. 2. Beverly Washington. On October 6, 1982, the police found Beverly Washington near a railroad track in Chicago. She was naked and was bleeding profusely from a large wound where her breast had been cut off. When she recovered, Washington was able to describe the attempted murder. She was a prostitute, and when a red van pulled over to pick her up, she got into the back of the van and saw that the men had a shotgun pointed at her. Gust urged her to get naked and perform oral sex on him. After that, she was handcuffed and given drugs. Before she passed out, she remembered a wire being held around her breast. Washington positively identified her captors and the van that they drove. The van was red and had a feathered roach clip hanging from the rear view mirror. Discovery and arrest. 3 weeks after Washington's statement, the police stopped a red van and sure enough, Edward Spritzer was driving it. He told the police that the van belonged to Robin Gisht and they raided his house. Washington's descriptions fit the image of Gisht, but the man denied all knowledge of the crimes. When he was first arrested, the police did not have enough evidence on Gisht, so he was released. However, Gisht, the two co-Corrales and Spritzer were arrested after the authorities found out that they rented a room at the motel near the site where Linda Sutton's body was found. Trial. During the trial, Andrew and Thomas co-Corrales and Edward Spritzer confessed to being part of Robin Gisht's cult that killed women and cut off their breasts as a sacrifice for Satan. They admitted to performing rituals where they masturbated on severed breasts and ate them raw. They also confessed to participating in several murders of random women that they had picked in their van. However, their alleged leader, Robin Gisht, insisted on his innocence and even denied that he was good friends with the three men. He remained tight-lipped all throughout and never admitted to any of the murders. Despite the eyewitness evidence, the authorities could not produce enough solid evidence of the murders against Gisht. So he was only sentenced to 120 years in prison for the attempted murder, rape, battery and armed violence of Beverly Washington. Gisht was never charged with murder and he will be eligible for parole in 2020. Meanwhile, the other members of the crew confessed to the crimes. Thomas co-Corrales was given a life sentence for murder. His brother, Andrew co-Corrales, was sentenced to death for the murder of Borowski, and he was the last man to be executed in Illinois, on March 17, 1999. Edward Spritzer was also given a death sentence, but his case was done after the moratorium for execution was enforced. He was charged for the murder of 3 women and the drug dealer and is to serve a lifelong sentence. Sixth story. Chijin family, Korean cannibal gang. Overview. The Chijin family was a gang of criminals that held a grudge against the rich. And they had a very odd way of punishing them. They murdered and ate the flesh of their victims, who were usually rich customers in department stores. Background. The Chijin family was not a family in the strictest sense. They were a group of men, led by Kim Ki-won, a prisoner who had been released from prison after serving his sentence. Kim did not receive any formal education and was a petty thief that had been in and out of prison since he was young. Kim Ki-won held a great grudge towards the rich and the society that made poor people like him suffer while continuing to make the rich people even richer. After his release, he decided to recruit a number of people that, like him, shared the same hatred for the rich and their society. Over time, he gathered 6 members of his gang, which he later named Chijin family. The group was composed of ex-convicts, his friends when he was in prison, and unemployed workers who blamed their status on the rich who extorted what little money they had. Modus operandi. Initially, the Chijin family would kidnap rich people from high-end areas of Seoul. They would obtain money from those they abducted under duress. This modus operandi lasted for about a year until they decided to devise a more systematic approach to pouring out their rage upon the wealthy. The gang wanted to obtain a list of some of the wealthiest people in South Korea's capital. In the end, they were able to get hold of the mailing list of the exclusive customers of the Hyundai department store by blackmailing one of the establishment's employees. At the list was the business top 1,000 customers who paid for their purchases with numerous credit cards. the group would randomly pick a name and choose their next victim. The Chijin family would locate the selected rich person, kidnap him/her and take him/her to their hideout in the hilly part of the city. The group owned a house, far from the city and in total seclusion. There, they would torture and mutilate those that they had kidnapped. It is not known if the group performed sexual abuse, but after committing the murder they would cut up their victims and eat their flesh raw. To dispose of what remained of their victims' bodies, the Chijin family would either bury them on the remote hillside surrounding their hideout or burn the corpses on a made-to-order incinerator big enough to hold human bodies. Arrest and trial. The last person that the group kidnapped fortunately escaped the gang before he was tortured and killed. He saw the hideout, the incinerator, and some scattered belongings that he was certain didn't belong to his captors. He tipped off the police and they responded quickly in the hope of capturing the culprits that had been associated with a number of disappearances in Seoul. On November 1, 1994, all of the Chijin family and Kim Ki-won were charged with the murder of the 5 people who had reportedly been kidnapped in the same year. Throughout the trial, the perpetrators did not show any remorse and gruesomely detailed how they ate their victims to relinquish their faith in humanity and sate their anger for the rich. All the members of the Chijin family admitted to the murders attributed to them. And one of them even claimed that his only regret was they weren't able to murder more wealthy people. In 1995, all 7 of them were executed. 7th killer. Boone Helm, the Kentucky cannibal. Overview. Boone Helm, a man that traversed the mountains of West America in the late 1800s, was dubbed as the Kentucky cannibal because of his insatiable desire for human flesh. This flesh usually came from random people that he met during his travels. Early life. Boone Helm was born on January 28, 1828, in the county of Lincoln, Kentucky. He was born into a family that, although not very famous, had a good reputation in the community. At an early age, Helm and his family moved to Missouri. Helm, as a teenager, was known to be a boy that had the habit of displaying his bravado and manliness. He would often ride his horse and performed several tricks, such as throwing a knife to the ground and picking it up while still riding the animal. There was also an occasion when Helm burst into a court proceeding that he was not a part of and verbally attacked the judge. Despite his rough behavior, he still ended up married. However, he continued to be a violent and inappropriate man. Helm was known to abuse his wife and would barge into establishments whilst riding his horse. First murder. Around the 1850s, the time when the gold rush in California broke out, Helm decided to go on a journey to try his luck in the gold fields. He frequently physically abused his wife and he was a constant drain on his father's purse, so the decision to leave home was an easy one. Helm encouraged his cousin, Little Barry Shute, to accompany him on the trip. Shute initially said yes, but in the end, changed his mind. The sudden change in plans angered Helm, which led him to commit his first murder. He repeatedly stabbed Shute until he died. Helm was subsequently tried, but his behavior during the trial led the authorities to assume that he was not in his right mind and that he was suffering from a mental disorder. He was charged with murder, but instead of spending his sentence in prison, Helm was sent to a lunatic asylum in California. During his stay in the asylum, Helm would trick the guard into allowing him to walk into the woods for him to clear and calm his mind. The guard, apparently having a soft spot for the seemingly insane Helm, would agree to his requests. On one occasion, however, Helm successfully escaped the premises of the asylum by beating the guard and escaping into the woods. From there, Helm fled. in the direction of California and his original destination, the gold fields. Succeeding murders. Following his escape from the asylum, Helm frequently journeyed through the mountains of California. During his trips, Helm obtained firearms, a horse and some of the basic necessities of a mountain man. During his journey, he would meet a number of random men and join their group, or somehow lead his own. In these short but rather unlikely companionships, Helm would always be the one to challenge the men he met along the way. They would fight, sometimes with their fists or with their guns, and wouldn't stop until one of them lay dead. It is not known how many random men Helm killed. Murder of the miners. On one of the routes Helm followed, he and another man he had picked up along the way, met 3 miners somewhere near the Keithley Creek. The said miners, who had already excavated a large amount of gold from the cave they had explored, were shot dead by Helm. The gold that the miners possessed was buried by Helm and his companion, and the bodies of the miners were left on the road. He was deemed a suspect by the local authorities and he fled to the northeastern mountains. Cannibalism of Burton. After some time, Helm again gathered a number of companions, all with the common goal of reaching Idaho. However, the group encountered a number of problems. First, they were attacked by a number of Indians and who chased them into unknown territory. Second, the weather never cooperated, as Helm's group encountered several strong blizzards along the way. Although they somehow came out alive, by the time they reached familiar terrain, all of their food had run out. The group gradually became fewer and fewer, the weak were left behind and only those with enough energy left continued the journey. Eventually, only 2 men were left, Helm himself and a man named Burton. According to Helm, in a later confession, both he and Burton were occupying an abandoned hut in the forest, but they didn't have any food left. While gathering firewood, Helm claimed to have heard a pistol fire. When he rushed back, he saw Burton's head had been blown to pieces. His companion had committed suicide. The authorities, however, suspected that it was Helm who actually killed Burton. Helm feasted on Burton's corpse, munching on the flesh of the man's extremities. When he was done, he chopped off the man's leg and carried it on his shoulder, a food supply that he kept for his next journey. Hired killer of the Mormons. Helm continued south where he met a kind rancher named John Powell. The rancher took care of him. Powell gave him clothes, food, and shelter, but Helm did not appreciate any of this. He wordlessly left Helm's house and headed to the Mormon settlements. He eventually became a hired killer for the Mormons. They paid Helm to kill people that they wanted to get rid of in exchange for money. His name gradually made the list of the suspects for unsolved murders and he once again fled. Murder and cannibalism of succeeding companions. Driven back to the wilderness, Helm found himself once again on a journey similar to those he had undertaken years before. He was still in search of more gold in Florence. Here, he was believed to have murdered and cannibalized a number of his companions. A man named Dutch Fred, equally known as tough and violent a man as Helm, was murdered by the latter while he was unarmed. Helm was supposedly up for trial for murdering Fred, but his brother, known as Old Tex, paid off all the witnesses. With all the witnesses gone, Helm got his freedom back. Arrest and execution. Helm continued to evade the law and he joined Henry Plummer and his gang in a string of robberies and murders. The group was eventually arrested and tried. They were all found guilty and Helm initially denied all the killings attributed to him. After being interrogated and even after Helm swore on the Bible that he had not killed anyone in his life, he eventually admitted to the murders in California and Texas. He also admitted to eating Burton's remains and confessed that if he were given another opportunity to eat human flesh, he would delightfully do so. Helm, together with Henry Plummer's gang, was executed in Virginia City, Montana, with around 6,000 people as an audience. At the execution, Helm apparently told the executioners that he was not afraid to die. When he was watching one of his friends about to be hanged, he told him that he'd be in hell too, after a minute. As the execution went on, Helm appeared to have gotten bored and jumped off the box to hang himself before his turn. Eighth killer. Nikolai Zhimagaliyev, the Metal Fang. Overview. Nikolai Zhimagaliyev was known for his unusual white metal, false teeth, thus the moniker Metal Fang. Later, however, Zhimagaliyev became known for killing and chopping up women, usually prostitutes, whose flesh and body parts were often served to his guests. Early life. Nikolai Zhimagaliyev, born on November 15, 1952, was the son of a Kazakh man and a Belarusian woman. Zhimagaliyev led a pretty normal childhood, as far as is known. He went to school and entered the army. Zhimagaliyev, for those who knew him, was a fairly well-spoken and clean-shaven man who could make any woman fall in love with him. In 1977, after being in a number of relationships, he contracted syphilis and trichomoniasis, all sexually transmitted diseases. He didn't have any problems with relationships with women, but later, he admitted that his main goal was to eradicate prostitution in the world, and he was positively against matriarchy. When he failed to gain entry into the Kazakh university, Zhimagaliyev decided to travel all over the Soviet Union and had numerous different jobs. He eventually settled in his hometown, Uzunagach, Kazakhstan, to become a fireman. At some point in his life, he lost some of his teeth and a dental procedure was performed, giving him dentures of white metal. Modus operandi. Nikolai Zhimagaliyev was imprisoned for attempted manslaughter, but he was released in the late 1970s. It is believed that it was during this time that he started losing his sanity. Holding a certain hatred with women, the cause of this, though, is not clear. Zhimagaliyev murdered women, especially prostitutes, cut them up and then cooked them. First murder. Zhimagaliyev's first murder was on January 1979. According to him, he carefully planned his first crime. He expressed his passion for hunting and he wanted to feel what it was like to hunt a woman. The victim, who was a woman he had chosen beforehand, was walking alone in a deserted street. Zhimagaliyev ran after her and strangled her with his arm. When the woman tried to shout and resist, he slashed her neck and fed on the flowing blood. After hiding from some vehicles that passed the murder site, Zhimagaliyev stripped the victim naked, severed her breasts, and opened up her stomach to dissect and remove her ovaries. He continued to slice the body up and then put the chopped remains in his backpack. He then took the woman's remains home and made use of her body parts in the most gruesome recipe ever. Fat. He scraped the fat from the flesh and used it to fry his own food. Sometimes, even frying the woman's flesh itself in her own fat. Flesh. Zhimagaliyev used a meat mincer to make ground meat from the woman's flesh. He made dumplings with them and then pickled some lean meat. He tried to grill the lean parts of the woman's flesh, but it was too chewy, so he cooked it together with her fat. Heart and kidneys. He also chopped up the heart and the kidneys and grilled them. According to Zhimagaliyev, he ate the woman all by himself and it took him about a month to finish everything. Succeeding murders. Those who know him would describe him as a man who liked to spend time by himself. He enjoyed strolling on the road beside the river, which appeared quite normal. However, the truth was, this was the spot where he lured his next victim. First he would strike up a conversation with her and then encourage her to follow him to a secluded place. There, he would sexually abuse the victim and kill her by hitting her head with an axe. He would then proceed to eat some of the flesh or drink her blood, and chop up the body in a way that he could fit the pieces into his bag. He would take the chopped up remains to his house, store them and cook them for different occasions. In some cases, he would lure the woman to his apartment and he would murder her there. In fact, at one of the parties that Zhimagaliyev threw, he killed one of his female visitors in a room. One of the male visitors allegedly saw the scene, and Zhimagaliyev, apparently afraid of being caught, shot the man dead. The case was dismissed as an accidental shooting. In total, 9 deaths were attributed to Zhimagaliyev, all of whom he sexually abused, murdered, mutilated, and then cooked and ate their flesh. After carving off his victims' flesh, he would store them in his refrigerator and gradually cook them into gourmet dishes, snacks, and main meals that he often served to his friends when he threw a party. These parties, as later noted, were usually held after his murder's arrest. During one of his parties, 2 of Zhimagaliyev's drunk friends found their way into the man's kitchen. As they were looking for something to drink, they opened the refrigerator and found a woman's severed head facing them. The men panicked and they alerted the police. Zhimagaliyev was arrested and found guilty of at least 7 murders. However, after a psychological evaluation conducted before the trial, he was deemed a schizophrenic and thus, not in a sane mind to stand trial and also not solely responsible for the murders on the grounds of insanity. He was sent to a mental institution, but as he was being transferred some years after his admittance, he managed to escape. He was free for around 2 years and it is unknown whether he committed crimes during that span of time. Zhimagaliyev was eventually recaptured in Fergana, Kazakhstan in 1991 and was taken back to the asylum. 9th killer. Tamara Samsonova, Granny Ripper. Overview. Tamara Samsonova, an elderly pensioner living in St. Petersburg, Russia, was seen carrying large plastic bags out of her residential building on July 27, 2015. Though seemingly inconspicuous, the bags were found to contain the chopped remains of Samsonova's flatmate. On her arrest, it was suspected that she had probably killed, mutilated, and eaten 11 more people over the last 20 years. Life history. Tamara Samsonova, born on 1948 in Russia, used to be a hotel monitor during the Soviet era. Monitors, during that time, were actually KGB, a spying and security organization of the Soviet Union, prostitutes. Though prostitution was illegal during that era, Samsonova served as a spy in one of the most luxurious hotels in Russia, the Grand Hotel Europe. KGB prostitutes were tasked with collecting information about foreign guests entering the establishment. Her husband mysteriously disappeared in 2005, and when asked where he went, Samsonova would answer that the matter was very sad. She would say that her husband just left and disappeared. Later in her life, it is believed that Samsonova had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had been in and out of a mental health facility for medications. Latest murder. Valentina Ulanova, aged 79, used to live a few blocks away from Samsonova's house. Due to her illness, she became partially paralyzed. Samsonova offered to take care of her friend and encouraged Ulanova to move into her 2-room apartment, which she always rented out. According to their neighbors, the two lived rather peacefully until the last week of July. Samsonova claimed that she and Ulanova had an argument one night in July 2015, because the latter had offended her. The Ulanova's offense, however, was only her failure to wash the teacups after they both had tea. When Ulanova was about to go to bed, Samsonova forced her to swallow a handful of sleeping pills. She then cut Ulanova, who was still alive but knocked out, into 8 pieces using a handsaw and a knife. Ulanova was brutally sawed and chopped up. Her extremities were put into different plastic bags, her torso and hips were packed separately and her head placed in her favorite saucepan. On the night of July 27, the neighbors noted seeing Samsonova carrying out around 4 black plastic bags and a saucepan. Thinking the bags only contained garbage, they didn't take any notice of the incident. Her actions were captured by the CCTV camera of the building. 3 days later, one of the residents of the area was walking his dogs around the neighborhood. His dogs went straight to the plastic bag lying near the garbage area of the park, near the pond. He thought the bag only contained chicken bones, but he was shocked and terrified to see a chopped off leg. He alerted the police, and later, the upper torso, which was wrapped in a shower curtain, was found yards away from the first body part. Shortly after that, the plastic bags containing the lower torso, hips, and thighs were recovered. The bags containing Ulanova's body parts were found in different parts of their neighborhood, but it is not known where the head went to. Investigation. The identification of the body parts successfully pointed to a certain Valentina Ulanova, an elderly woman who recently moved in with the Tamara Samsonova. Samsonova instantly became a suspect, and as the police checked the CCTV coverage of the building, the last that was seen of Ulanova was before Samsonova came out of the building with heavy plastic bags. This gave the police a reason to raid the old woman's place. There, they saw a book on astrology and witchcraft with missing pages. Upon thoroughly checking the flat, they saw blood stains on the bathroom walls and retrieved a handsaw and a large knife. The police also recovered heaps of diaries written by Samsonova, written in English, Russian and German. Her knowledge of foreign languages can probably be attributed to her past profession as a KGB prostitute. Some of the contents of the diary were rather normal and trivial, like indicating how she drank too much coffee, taken medicine, or had difficulty in sleeping. Other entries, however, were rather disconcerting. Samsonova detailed in her diary how she killed, mutilated, and even ate a total of 11 people from 1990 to the present. She indicated that she always liked gouging out human internal organs from her victims, especially the lungs, and eating them. Possible murders. 1 2003, unknown tenant. According to her neighbor, the old woman had a number of tenants in the previous years. These tenants, however, did not last long in the house, and she assumed that they just didn't like Samsonova as their landlady. After the incident with Ulanova, though, she realized the possibility that the tenants might have not even left at all. Samsonova described in her diary a tenant that she once had around 2003. He was 44 years old and was a native of Norilsk. She wrote in detail how she drugged the man and murdered him. The severed torso of the man, which had a missing head, arms, and legs, was found near Samsonova's flat. The missing pages of the astrology and witchcraft book found in Samsonova's apartment matched those that had been found together with the body parts of the tenant in 2003. 2005, husband. Whenever Samsonova was asked where her husband had gone, she only gave vague answers. Her husband was reported missing in 2005, and he was never seen again, dead or alive. 3. Unknown year, tenant named Validia, In another diary entry, Samsonova detailed how she murdered a tenant named Validia. After the man died, she cut him up in the bathroom using a kitchen knife. She then put the body parts in separate plastic bags and threw them all over the Frunzensky district. 4. Other murders. There were other murders thoroughly described in Samsonova's diary, but the details have not yet been released to the public. Trial. The first round of trials for Samsonova commenced in the first week of August 2015. Before she was brought to court, she seemed not to be worried about the charges that would be brought against her. Instead, she expressed her worry as to what the reporters might say in the news, and about her neighbors finding out that she was a murderer. A number of inappropriate behaviors from the old woman have been noted. She wanted to leave in the middle of the court proceeding, saying that it was too stuffy, and she even blew a kiss to the reporters, all smiles. She then claimed that she was ready to go to court, and she has been prepared for years. She told the journalists that everything was deliberately done, and the last murder was to close the chapter. When asked by the court judge what she thinks about being arrested, she claimed that it was up to him, since she was guilty and of course, she deserved punishment. When Samsonova heard that she was to be held in custody, she seemed delighted and clapped her hands. 10th killer. Lino Renzi, I cooked my mother. Overview. Lino Renzi has always been considered insane. However, after leaving the mental health facility for a number of years, nobody thought that he would kill, mutilate and cook his own mother. Life history. The earlier life of the 45-year-old Lino Renzi have not been documented, but it is known that he had been in and out of an Italian mental health facility for a number of years. A month before he allegedly murdered his own mother, Pia Gariglia, Renzi had been released from the asylum and was to take prescription drugs to aid in his recovery. Murder. On the night of July 20, 2013, Lino Renzi and his mother had a large argument over something that he could not recall in the later court proceedings, possibly due to his unstable mind and insanity. He claimed that he got so enraged that he beat his mother to a pulp and killed her. He then chopped her body up and scraped some of her flesh off her bones. Renzi tried to eat his mother's flesh raw but decided that it didn't taste very good. He chopped off Gariglia's foot first and proceeded to cut up the other parts and stored them in the refrigerator. However, according to Renzi, moments after he chopped up his mother, he recognized what he had done. Renzi wanted to remedy his actions and tried to put his mother's body parts back together. Realizing that it would not help, he continued to dissect Gariglia and he took out her intestines. He cut them into smaller pieces and grilled them on the stove. Other parts were put in a pot. Scene discovery. On July 24, 2013, a person called the police to report a very foul odor coming from the apartment of Renzi and his mother. The police expected to find a gas leak, but what they saw made their stomachs turn. Pia Gariglia's body had been chopped up into several pieces and had been scattered all around the apartment. The majority of her remains were found in the bathroom, which was where they believe Renzi had brutally killed and cut her up with a saw. Upon inspection of the kitchen, the police saw remains in the freezer and some parts were put into large pots to boil. The source of the foul gas was the grilling of Gariglia's intestines and internal organs. The saw used to cut up the woman's flesh was also found in the bathroom, and prescription drugs were found in the kitchen counter. Lino Renzi was found in his own bedroom, completely naked and in a dazed and confused state. He was instantly taken into custody by the police. Investigations and the autopsy revealed that Gariglia has been dead for 3 days. After the discovery of the crime, investigations and trial. Immediately after the discovery of Pia Gariglia's remains, the police had two theories: that the old woman had died of natural causes and Renzi was at a loss as to what to do, or Renzi was the sole culprit and that he killed his own mother. Before he was scheduled for trial, Renzi was sent to a mental facility for evaluation. He was also subjected to a stool examination to determine if he had indeed eaten his mother's flesh. In the December 3, 2013 trial, Renzi gave incoherent statements and gibberish claims, but at some point he admitted that the death of his mother was not due to natural causes. He stated that they got into a fight which led to the violence and later made him kill and mutilate her. He also gave gruesome details of how he cut up his mother's body parts, stored and attempted to boil and grill them. To strengthen the evidence, the stool examination proved to be positive for Pia Gariglia's DNA. In the end, Renzi tried to plead for his life, claiming that he would mend his ways, take his medicines and even call on Pope Francis for help. At present, Renzi is still in the custody of the police and the supervision of psychiatrists. The matriarchal cannibalism of Renzi, if confirmed, will be the first in Italy. Conclusion. Thank you again for downloading this book. The motives for murder and serial killing, according to psychologists, ranges from thrill-seeking and anger to attention-seeking and financial gain. Although it might seem sickening, these killers and psychopaths exist in the past and the present time, and some of them still have their freedom and are lurking in different corners of the world. Serial killers who butcher, mutilate, and even eat their own victims are the worst of their kind. Some kill and mutilate for sexual gratification, some for revenge, and some just for the lust for human flesh. This book has explored different kinds of butchering serial killers: those who eat human flesh for survival and or want, drink the blood of their victims and excessively mutilate their victims. And then there are those who kill to eradicate people they consider scum and those who take revenge for the unfairness of society. Whatever the motives of these serial killers, there is one fact that we must accept: they exist. These killers are in our midst and they could be one of the people that we interact with every day. The best advice is, always be vigilant. I hope you enjoyed this book. Thank you and take care.